Just buy a house. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop wasting money on designer clothes and lattes. The people dishing out this advice are the same ones who got to play the property game on ultra easy mode. They bought homes when they were ultra cheap and then got to ride the wave of government-backed policies that turned their modest investments into golden bloody tickets. And now they look down from their ivory towers built on decades of speculative growth and wag their fingers at people without a home and call them lazy and entitled. But the thing is, they don't have a clue what it's like to save in an economy where every dollar is worth less by the day, where rents eat up half your paycheck, and where house prices have skyrocketed to the point where even a shoebox in the suburbs feels like a pipe dream. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. A snail walks into a bar on New Year's Eve, slides up to the bartender and says, "Hey man, how about a Guinness?" The bartender looks at the snail in disgust, opens the window and flicks him outside. 12 months later, on New Year's Eve, the same snail goes into the same bar and slides up to the bartender. "Hey man, what the bloody hell was that for?" And you'll feel like an angry snail if you don't get a regular dose of my content. So hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. For today's video, we're going to check out this street interview with a 75-year-old.
How old are you and how much do you have in savings?
I'm 75 and I have roughly 2 million in savings.
Okay.
2 million's a huge whack of cash. Many young people stuck in the rental market will struggle just to have any savings come retirement.
And how did you get to accumulate that wealth?
Hard work, property investing, share market investing, taking risks, being frugal.
The hard work thing gets me a lot in these discussions. Now, I'm not saying they didn't work hard because I know many sure did, but I am saying that there's many middle-aged and younger people working extremely hard as well. But the worst thing for them that the older generations didn't have was pressure to be able to afford suitable shelter. So if you've recently just bought a house or you're renting, the housing costs you have to pay are astronomically higher than what was paid many years ago. So it's that pressure and the extreme difficulty to get into the market, which is one of the key differences.
What are some of those risks that you took?
When you buy a property, do you know that it's going to increase in value?
Yes, in Australia, you do freaking know that it's going to increase in value. And that's because the government has proven they'll do everything in their power to prop up the housing market. Even the current housing minister has stated that the government's policies are designed to increase house prices.
Our government's, policies are not going to reduce house prices. We want house prices to grow sustainably.
And that's even after some of the most craziest house price gains seen over the last few years. So in Australia, house prices going up are the closest thing to a sure bet. And because of that, the biggest winners in Australia when it comes to wealth were those who were able to buy property when it was ultra cheap. And when I say ultra cheap, any time before the year 2000, house prices in Australia were generally 3 to 4 times the average income. And that meant a single full-time worker could easily afford their own home and pay it off relatively quickly. But what it also meant, you didn't need that much money to get into investment properties because you were collecting rent. And then after the year 2000, when house prices started growing way faster than wages, you were able to use that consistent increase in equity to be able to purchase more and more investment properties.
Okay.
When you buy shares, there is a chance that the share market will crash, as has happened twice in the last 20 years.
This is true. The share market is volatile and is prone to crashes. But notice that he didn't mention property and crash in the same sentence. And that's because it's illegal for the housing market to crash in Australia. And when I say illegal, there's more chance that hell would freeze over than the government or the RBA would intentionally allow house prices to crash. And that's because Australia's economy is totally dependent on ever-rising house prices. That's why policymakers seem to love mass immigration levels, because it keeps demand for property ultra high, which maintains that upward momentum on house prices. That combined with a myriad of other policies that are designed to create speculative demand for housing. Things like negative gearing, capital gains tax discount, no capital gains tax on your principal place of residence, and things like that. In Australia, The housing obsession is so strong that as soon as the doctor smacks your bum, he asks why you haven't bought a home yet.
And how was entering the property market when you did?
You're talking 25 years ago.
So if he did buy his first investment property 25 years ago, then that would have been around 1999, just before house prices started taking off. But the other thing to remember, he most likely would have owned his own home and had it fully paid off by then. So having a fully paid off home with a yard in a place like Sydney means that you already own a large asset, but it also means you don't have a large housing payment or rent payment, and because of that, you normally have a lot of income left over after all your expenses, and that income can be used to invest with. Now consider that situation compared to people renting or buying today. Because their housing payments are so high, they're left with very little at the end of the month to invest with. Add to that the crazy current cost of everything, and it's no wonder many Australians now feel completely locked out of the housing market.
Okay.
So my first property, as an investment property, was a two-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
And then from there, the value went up slightly.
Okay.
And I used the equity in that to buy another two-bedroom apartment.
This is why the Australian government always wants house prices to rise, because the majority of Australians currently own property, and when those properties rise, they have more equity and they also feel more wealthy. And that combined sees them spending more into the economy, which Australia loves because it grows the GDP. But the shockingly unfair thing about this system is that some Australians are seeing their wealth skyrocket while others are being pushed towards poverty. So yes, it might look good on the official figures, but we're seeing a growing wealth divide which is tearing our society apart.
By the end of the day, we ended up with something like about, my wife and myself, 10 investment properties. And when we sold those, we made a lot of profit, and hence the $2 million in the bank.
So 10 investment properties, and on all of those, he could have minimized his tax due to negative gearing and capital gains tax discount. Now, what I hate about this system is that those who can't afford a property aren't able to take advantage of these tax minimization strategies. So they have to pay full tax on their incomes, while those benefiting from a rigged system are making way more profits but paying less comparable tax. But that's okay, because Australia's happy to support property owners and screw over everyone else.
Did you have any advice for young people who are maybe now entering the property market and might be struggling a little bit?
My world and your world are totally different.
Bloody oath they're different. A one-income household could have easily afforded a home back then, so all you needed was one person working out of a couple. You had less stress and you could easily afford and pay off a home. Now you've got two people in a couple working. They have all the stress of having to work full-time plus pay all the bills, and they still can't afford a bloody home. Do you see the complete difference in quality of life? And the strange thing is, many Australians don't seem to care because they aren't putting up any kind of fight.
For example, you're wearing a brand t-shirt. We never bought brand t-shirts.
What is he even talking about? She just looks like she's wearing normal clothes, nothing at all fancy.
Right? You're wearing brand shoes. We never bought brand shoes.
Okay.
Right? So you have this pressure on you to maintain a certain style.
Maintain a certain style? That's just called wearing bloody clothes. Do you want her to be out there naked?
That certain style costs money. Believe me, it costs money. We never had coffee shops. Right? If we wanted a coffee at work, right, we took our coffee into work and we made it at our desk. We had it there.
Now he's bringing out all the boomer classics. Designer labels, coffees, it goes on and on and on. How the heck does that make any difference? What's the point of skipping coffees or buying no-name brands and trying to save, say, $5,000 a year when house prices have been going up $100,000 a year? What the hell is that $5,000 gonna do? That's what the older generation don't seem to get about today's living. When the value of the dollar's being destroyed, saving doesn't make much sense. Yes, I get the concept of saving, but it worked so much better in the olden days when wages grew at a similar rate to inflation. What would they like young Australians to do? Scrimp and save for 20 years and maybe get to 100,000, but by that time, house prices have risen 500,000 or maybe even $1 million. Give me a bloody break.
Nowadays, everyone goes down and buys a cappuccino or a latte.
Drink instant, you lazy, entitled young people. If you want to get ahead, drink bloody instant coffee.
For young people today to manage that lifestyle and to save for a property at the same time must be difficult.
What lifestyle? They're just trying to survive. And if they're lucky, they'll receive an inheritance from their parents. But nowadays, with many people living over 80 years old, it'll be very late by the time many Australians receive any inheritance at all. And some will receive little inheritance, and some other Australians won't receive anything. It's no longer a fair go for everyone, where working hard, taking risks count for anything. It's only whether you or your family owns property. Societies thrive when everyone feels a little bit part of that nation. And the best way that can happen is when everyone has the opportunity to be able to afford their own home. But when that opportunity is taken away, society starts to hemorrhage.
Now, people keep talking about a cost of living crisis.
Yes.
I'll disagree strongly.
Okay.
There is no cost of living crisis.
What? Everything just went up 50% in price and wages hardly grew, yet there's no cost of living crisis? When the main expense for Australians being rent or house payments went through the roof? But no, that can't be considered a crisis. What are you talking about, son?
I look at all these high-end stores,
Yeah.
and I know that there's only a certain group of people that go into them, but I'm looking at people and I look how well you're dressed and whatever.
How good she's dressed. It's just clothes, my boy. And yes, tons of Australians are spending up big. And that's because we've got a wealth divide where some have won the bloody property lotto, yet other Australians are working full time but have to live in their car because they haven't been able to secure a rental. But the worst thing is, it's all by design.
I have a strong view. Our government's policies are not going to reduce house prices.
If people change some of their priorities, right, getting into the property market might be a bit easier.
Just buy a house, you bludgers. We could easily buy a house, so why don't you? It's time for all Australians to come together and demand improvement for housing affordability. Owning your own home is absolutely crucial for dignity and financial well-being. And I'd like that to be available for every Australian. I'm Biko Konstantinos.